So when we're talking about shot composition, what do we mean? What is shot composition? What's the deal with shot composition? Yep.
Is this where we talk about thirds?
That is one of the things we're going to be talking about for sure. Absolutely. When we say shot composition, we're literally talking about composing, right? So when you talk about composing in a paper, right, an essay, you're writing everything up. You're determining what's going into that paper, right? Composing music. We are composing the frame, right? So when we say we're composing the frame, we are determining what our audience is seeing. What's in focus? Where is the person in the frame? What are they seeing? What's in the background? What's in the foreground, right? When you know what I'm talking about when I say foreground and background, right? We're together on that, right? Background would obviously be what's behind me, foreground in front. I'm in the midground, right? Or if I'm all the way on the edge of the frame, right, then I'd be in the foreground, right? So our shot composition is everything that goes into our frame, right? We, as filmmakers or photographers, whatever side of the table you're on for the day, have to decide what our audience is going to be seeing, right? And by doing so, we are telling them a story. Every decision that we make in our shot composition needs to help move things forward. When you watch a TV show or a movie or whatever, you're on Instagram, maybe you're watching a reel because they are no longer a photo sharing app, right? Just ask them. Everything that we're putting into those frames, we need to be thinking about. We need to have a reason for everything. And typically speaking, the things that differentiate a good movie from a great movie is the attention to detail and what goes into a frame and why. The way things are framed up and what we choose to put into the frame can have great implications on what the story is, right? So let's talk about some basic stuff. First of all, we want to talk about our frame size and aspect ratio. Now these are things that you might be familiar with already, just based on your TV, for example, right? If you play video games. But the big thing that we want to concern ourselves with right now, without getting super, super deep into it, is that we are going to be shooting in 1080p. That's our frame, that's our resolution, right? So 1080 would be on this side. The longer would be 1920, right? Those are the dimensions when you bring it into the computer. And we're going to be editing in a couple weeks, so don't get too stressed over this right now. But the other thing that we want to know is our aspect ratio, which is 16:9. So there are different aspect ratios we can work with. For right now, that's the one that we're going to be best friends with. And then later on in the semester, if you want to break up with them and get different best friends, we can talk about that. Right, but some other ones, we have 21:9, which is more of a movie aspect ratio. We have 4:3, which is the older squarish one, right? The biggest one that we care about is 16:9, which gives us a rectangle, right? So 16:9, 1920 by 1080. That, by default, is what our cameras are going to be filming in. Now, those cameras are 4K. We can choose to shoot 4K as well, but we're still going to maintain that 16:9 aspect ratio. Why is this important? Why am I telling you this stuff? Why do you think? Yep?
It's the standard aspect ratio for 1920 by 1080.
Right, it's the standard aspect ratio, and understanding what shape that we're filming in is going to greatly influence how we frame things. If you're filming in a square versus a rectangle, right, or fast forward to now where things like TikTok and Reels on Instagram are becoming more and more popular and have more and more reach, right, 9:16, we have to frame all these things differently. Let's say, for argument's sake, you create a lot of content on YouTube, and you have all these rectangular videos, right? And you want to move your stuff onto Reels because you recognize, hey, Reels are getting pushed out to a lot of people. I can probably reach a new audience this way. You can't just take those exact same rectangular videos and squish them into the vertical format, right? The 9:16. You can't flip them and expect people to move their phone, which is kind of annoying, right? And if you were to take this rectangle and just squeeze it into here, right, you're going to have, it's going to fit right there, and then there's just nothing here. I guess you could put 3 copies of it. I don't know. Right? But these are things that we need to concern ourselves with because framing matters for the medium that they're being consumed on. In a perfect world, I think something like this, like a reel or a TikTok, should be filmed with that in mind, right? You don't want to, again, waste so much screen real estate. And I'm also not one of those people that's like, vertical video, right? It's unfortunately the future, whether you like it or not. So you got to know how to compose for these things. And I think in the coming years, 5-10 years from now, I think it'll be very standard that people will be talking about 9:16. I think that model of consumption is only going to increase over the years. Okay? But, like I said, we're going to focus on the more traditional 16:9. Okay, so let's get some room on the board. So 16:9 gives us a rectangle. And there are a couple of basic rules when we talk about composing on a rectangle. And the one that I want you guys to really focus on is known as the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds states that we can chop the frame up into thirds and give us a sort of guideline for compositional hotspots. The idea is that if we compose on these hotspots, we're creating interesting images. So what we do is we kind of make a big old game of tic-tac-toe on the frame. And what's great is that a lot of cameras actually have these frame lines on the viewfinder so you can see them. And what the rule of thirds is telling us is that on these areas where those lines intersect are the interesting places to compose our images. So, for example, if you're filming someone, it's usually more visually interesting to put that person on the third as opposed to right in the center. You can do it, of course, right? Again, these are basic rules, and we can, manipulate things as we go. But the idea is that, compositionally speaking, we are moving them in different parts of the frame. Now, when we have a dialogue sequence where 2 people are speaking to one another, we can use this to our advantage to help the viewers understand what the room looks like. I'll give you an example. This is person A. Draw another one real quick, right? And this right here is our shot reverse shot. So, what I want you guys to think of when I say that is a conversation. We're cutting between 2 people. They're both saying things, right? I'm over here saying Adobe's a bad software. Person B is over here saying, yeah, I agree, right? So we would frame person B up like that. And the reason we do so is because now they're both looking into the frame, and when we're cutting between these 2 things, they're looking at each other. They're engaged in a conversation. And the other big thing that this does is it respects the room. It helps convey to the viewer where they are in space, right? We're going to talk more about this as time goes on, but I want to just stick to some basic stuff of composition tonight, because space is one of those big things that I feel like people starting out kind of struggle with a little bit in continuity, but again, we will get to that as we go. Okay, so that is the basic idea. We compose based on these hot spots in there. Is it the 100% rule? No, but as you'll find as we go along, most things are never 100%. We can always break the rules, but it's important to know the rules in order to break the rules. Make sense? So, one of the other concepts that comes with the rule of thirds is known as balance. Balancing the frame. So the idea, if we're composing along the hot spots, we don't necessarily want to say, okay, well, this side of the frame's dead to me, right? We can put something in there to balance the frame. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a person. It doesn't necessarily, it could be. But the idea is that something else should land there to make things more interesting and give it a sort of balance. Think of it like a seesaw. If we put everything on the right side of the frame, the left side of the frame has got nothing to do. So let's say you're doing the dialogue scene that we're talking about. We have our person on the right side of the frame. Something of importance could be in the background in the left. Let's say, I don't know, they're talking about when they're going to get off work. And in the background we have a clock. It's 1 o'clock, right? we've now effectively balanced out the frame. We've put something interesting in the background. And let's say we're doing shallow depth of field, right? We have our aperture opened up wide. It's letting in a lot of light. We have a very shallow depth of field. The clock goes out of focus, and person B is like, what time is it? And then it rack focuses to the clock behind person A, and there you go, right? You've created a visual shot there. You have balance in the frame, balance in the force, right? All things are right with the world. Think about it outside too. If you frame someone up in your foreground, maybe your background has a big tall building, right? I don't know. That's a great building. My drawings aren't always out of the park, I'm sorry. All right, but the idea is that we're balancing out the frame. We're taking one of the thirds with a person and we're putting something else in the other third. Okay, we all together on this so far? Cool, awesome, okay. So, let me take a quick photo of this for the people on Zoom and then we'll erase. Okay, now, once again, when we talk about framing, it's not a rule to compose that way, but for this, when you're starting out, I want you guys to look for your compositions on the thirds, right? When you're framing someone up, how can you do so in an interesting way to put some object of interest behind them, right, in the background? I want you guys to be thinking about the whole frame, not just what's right in front of you, because everything in the frame matters. Everything that you include in the frame is a choice. So, that's what we got to think about. Now, one other important thing that we want to know about frames is known as vectors. And vectors is a very simple concept. The idea is that when we're framing someone up, we want to concern ourselves with the background. When I say that, though, we want to make sure that our happy little, this is person C now, our happy little person C doesn't have weird stuff going on behind them, right? So let's say you're outside and there's a bunch of street lamps in the background. We don't want to compose it so that person C has a street lamp coming out of his head. Right? We want to compose it so that the background is clear. Because even though we know the person C doesn't have a street light head, right? Sounds like a Silent Hill villain almost. We find that sort of thing distracting when we watch films, right? Most people will look at that and be like, oh, it's kind of weird. Even if you don't say it out loud, subconsciously, it's just not the norm. Unless there's a great reason to be composing something behind, typically, you want to make sure that the background is going to be kind of cleared of your subject. This could be true of trees as well, right? You don't want to have big tree head. So those are the things. You want to make sure that the background is clear. Now this could be used for comedic effect, right? If you have a specific idea where you want something lined up directly behind the person and maybe when they move it reveals something, hey, that's totally cool. But if you're doing it by accident, if you're doing it because your attitude is, I'm just going to turn on the camera and just go, that's something that you want to be conscious of. And this is something that Dr. Luske really gets upset about with the documentary if they just plop down a tripod and something's coming out of their head in the background. There was one in Hawaii like that, wasn't there?
Which time?
Oh, see? There you go. That's the two things, if you take a class with Dr. Luske, the two things, and I might save your life right now, is she never wants to see, I don't want to poke it, she never wants to see the lava on the shirt. Hi, Dr. Luske. And she never wants to see vectors coming out of people's heads. You do those two things, you'll probably be okay. You'll probably survive. I just didn't want to put it through my shirt. I apologize. So, vectors. It's an important thing to consider. When you're framing up, what you got to keep in mind is that you're active. You are the one deciding what's in the frame. So why is it there? That's the question that you need to be asking yourself. Okay? Same page? Doing all right? Beautiful. Okay. So I want to talk to you about a couple of types of shots, and then we're going to move on to the camera so that you guys can get some time to film. So we're going to start with a couple of basic shots tonight. We have a close-up, a medium, and a wide shot. Handwriting's really killing it. Don't judge me, I'm a lefty, you know? So those are our three basic shots. And the names are pretty self-explanatory. A close-up is roughly here, right? It's roughly like shoulder to a little bit above the head. Medium shot, right, we pull back a little bit more. It's usually about waist to above the head. And a wide shot would be head to toe, right? It's everything going into the frame. But there's a couple of things that we need to address when we're talking about these types of shots. The first is known as headroom, and the second is known as lead room. And some people also call that nose room. AKA. So headroom refers to that space on top of the frame. The idea is that we don't necessarily want to have our subject's head touching the top of the frame. Just because it's one of those things, we just look at it and it kind of feels a little wrong. So normally, we leave a little space. So if you go back to my previous drawings that I erased, or, we just make a new one real quick, this little portion here is known as headroom. We're leaving a little bit of space on the top of the frame there. And typically, it doesn't have to be a lot, right, but just a little bit, because we don't want the top of the head touching the frame. If you compose it and you'll look at it yourself and you're like, yeah, that looks kind of weird. The other one would be the nose room. So we have our person looking into frame there. Suddenly that drawing just got 80% worse, right? There's the face. Looking into frame. So this region here would be the nose room, right, or the look room. So the idea is we want to, wow, that was really strong there. So we want to have that space there because it's psychologically comforting to the viewer. It feels normal. Now, again, it's the theme of the night, right? The rules exist, but they're also made to be broken. How many of you have seen the show Mr. Robot? Right? They do it all the time in that show. Weird framing, where things are kind of claustrophobic. When you bring the subject's head right to the frame like that, it starts to feel a little more claustrophobic. It feels like they're tight, like they're trapped in the frame. Or if you flip this shot and put person D all the way to the edge of the frame there, where their nose is right on the edge of it, it kind of feels like, why are they there? Why are they so close to the edge? What's about to come in behind them? It's not the normal way we frame things up, and therefore it makes us as the viewer feel a little on edge, right? Let's make person E over here real quick. Person E is over here. Person E might not be happy for long because what's going to come in behind person E? So it's the type of framing that we're not used to seeing, and usually when it's framed up in such a way, there's a reason for it. It's good for horror movies, right? What's going to come up behind you and grab you and pull you into the darkness, right? Cut your head off or something. All that fun stuff. I love horror movies. Those are some of the basics there. Okay? Same page? Beautiful. Okay, awesome. So, there are other shots than these, but I want you guys to start off with these tonight, and I'll explain in just a moment. But keep in mind, there are shots where you can get in even closer, right, known as an extreme close-up. You can do an extreme wide. And there are other types of shots that we're going to go into in the coming weeks, but these are the basic things in your toolbox. These are the basic types that are going to come into play with a lot, whether you're making a documentary, shooting a wedding, whether you're doing an independent film where people are talking to each other. These shots are the core of everything. If you guys can't tell, the theme of tonight is the core, right? The basic stuff, your basic toolkit. Okay, so these are the shots.